Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all. So, we've been talking over the past few days about a couple of topics. We talked about the making of meaning, the fact that we make the meaning of the events that happen in our lives. We talked about the fact that we have the power to choose. And then we talked about the fact that the value of the truth is so important, and it's really important to get to the truth. But the question remains, how do we get to the truth? So today I'd like to introduce three tools that help the mind get to the truth. They are first, reason, second, critical thinking, and third, questioning. So we're going to dive in. Okay, so reason is the starting point. And reason, or aql in Arabic, is one of the core features of humanity. It's one of the gifts that God has given us that makes us unique compared to all of the other creatures. All sorts of animals and plants are wonderful, but they lack that capacity of aql the way that we do, the ability to reason. We use it as a tool to help us navigate through life. And if we use it well, it will help to serve us. And if we use it improperly, it can lead us down a sometimes difficult path. So I want to talk a little bit about what aql is, what reasoning really is. Aql, reason, is using the ability of understanding concepts properly according to their own truth and understanding and weighing the logic and the essence of whether something makes sense or doesn't make sense. Something that follows naturally from the understanding of which we're presenting, and that is, again, reasonable, rational, logical. So there are basics in logic, and of course this isn't a logic class or something, but there are principles of logic that you want to follow, making sure that your premises connect to your conclusions, making sure that the conclusions will necessarily follow from your premises. There's all of that stuff involved. But to keep it simple, making sure that that which you are asserting follows from what it is that you're claiming, and that starts with evidence. So we present evidence in life trying to show that things are the way they are, and then we have to ask ourselves, is it rational? Is it logical? Does, just because the evidence is there, does that necessarily conclude that therefore it should imply or sort of cause the conclusion to be there? So rather than talking in metaphorical and sort of abstract language, I'll give a practical example. So we've talked about this a little bit before, but we're going to talk about it again in a different context now. So here we're going to say, okay, I have been late to work, right? That is, I guess, a fact. That's evidence. That's something that has happened. And the question is, does that mean logically, rationally, reasonably, that therefore I don't care enough or I don't care at all about my job? So that's a question. Somebody might say, oh, well, that's what the evidence points to. If you show up late, that means you don't care. That's one possible explanation, but is it the only explanation? Reason tells us that there are other possible explanations for why this is the case, and we have to use the evidence in the situation in order to understand what's going on. It could be that my car broke down. It could be that public transit was delayed. It could be that I overslept and I was sick. There could be many reasons that I was late, or it could be that, it just so happened that I wasn't able to make it on time the way that I wanted to. It also could be evidence in the fact that I don't care about my job. But is that the only possibility? No, you have to explore which one of those possibilities is actually the true cause of the action and the true interpretation. That piece of evidence has multiple conclusions that could come from it, but it's the job of reason to understand and look for patterns and look for a history. Have you been late every day? Have you been late, whether it's a good day or a bad day? Have you been late even when the public transit is working properly? All of these things are reasonable, are rational. These are logical deductions. And trying to understand what is the truth is helped by the ability to use reason. I'm going to give another example, a little more personal. So imagine that you have gone through a situation in which you made a promise to a friend to do something, and then you weren't able to do it. And then that friend then says, oh, Omar, you made a promise, you said you were going to do this and you didn't do it. You're a bad friend. You're not really my friend. Again, the question is that logical? Is that reasonable? Is that rational? It might be that something came up, and it might be, if you notice a pattern of this happening 5 times, 10 times, 20 times, yeah, chances are we're probably not good friends. There's writing on the wall. That's clearly what's going on. But the truth of the matter is it could be something else. But again, reason, rational, logical questioning will help you to determine whether this is a one-off or whether it's a recurring theme. And so again, the idea of, is this rational? Is this logical? Does this necessarily come from the evidence that's being presented? And that is one of the keys of using reason. Reason, or aql, is the ability to deduce and to understand whether something naturally flows from the evidence and how to interpret that evidence. There are always lots of options, but sometimes you've got to find the patterns and you've got to see which one actually makes sense, which one actually connects, and which one ultimately is the truth. And again, it's a weighing game. It's a tool that you use to help you find the truth. There's an art to this more than a science, if you will. But that's one of the ways that we can use logic. One of the other things that you can use logic in is impossibility of conclusions. So like, imagine that I say, I believe that so I'll put it this way. I know that I have 5 apples I know that I bought 5 apples from the store and they're in my fridge. And I think that I have eaten 3 of them. And then I go into my fridge and I notice that there are 4 there. So if I know that for a fact that I bought 5 apples and I think that I ate 3 of them, the fact that there's 4 in there means there's no way that I could have eaten that many. Obviously, right? Because there's still 4 there. So from that simple scenario, you can use the fact that the conclusion can't possibly be true if that idea that I'm verifying the truth of was true. If I really did eat that 3 apples, there's no way I could have 4 left because the math doesn't add up. So when you look at the conclusion of an argument or the conclusion of an idea, and you look at the evidence that's certain, you can then say, well, these 2 pieces don't add up. Now that's a very superficial example, but it explains the point. But maybe a more reasonable example is called for. And I'm going to make this an interpersonal one. Let's say that you have say that your mother. We're talking about the relationship between me and my mother. And I have this idea, this conclusion, that my mother doesn't love me, right? For example, it really doesn't like me. So that's a very strong and powerful emotion and a very powerful idea. But if we look at the conclusion that, well, my mother is very nice to me, treats me well, although she may criticize from time to time, right? She still overwhelmingly displays acts of love and connection and affection and these other things. So does it follow that if people are reaching out to you, trying to take care of you, trying to be there for you, trying to be supportive of you, does it make logical sense that they are angry at you always and they hate you and they never want any good for you in your life? This is an ability, using this logical, rational process, we can see if, for example, they never talked to you and they never checked up on you and they didn't care about you, and that's what the evidence points to and that's what the conclusion is, then it makes sense. But if the conclusion of what you're thinking doesn't match the evidence of what's in your life situation, you don't have to accept a belief that says everybody hates me or my mother hates me or this person hates me. You can say, wait, the evidence here shows otherwise. Clearly, they're checking up on me because they care about me. Clearly, they're talking to me in this way because they're worried about me. Clearly, they are expressing their displeasure at a behavior that I'm doing, not because they hate me, but because they care about me. So again, there are things that are open to interpretation, but when you use these tools of logic, making sure that the evidence suggests the conclusions, and checking the conclusions to see if they make sense with the evidence, these are all tools of ways of using aql, reasoning, to understand the truth of a given situation. And again, we're talking mostly about interpersonal connections. We could talk about this in the philosophical tense, but that's not where we're going with this. We're talking about how can we use our mind to help ensure that we feel good about our life situation, given, again, the starting premises, right? We have the power to make meaning. We have the power to choose what we believe. We have the power to choose which things we want to believe when the evidence is ambiguous, when there's not 100% in one direction or the other. We have a choice to make. And then number 3, the value of ascertaining the truth. So these two tools, in terms of logic and reasoning, which is logic, letting the evidence follow, and then looking at the conclusions and seeing if they make sense given the evidence that's been confirmed. Now let's move on to critical thinking. So critical thinking is asking the question, what follows from this? So not just taking everything at face value. So somebody may come up to you and say, oh, hey, I heard that this guy doesn't like you, and then walk away. And you've got to ask yourself, why is this person saying this to me at this point? Do they have a reason? Do they have an ulterior motive? Do they have something that they're concerned about? Do they have something to gain? Are they being honest and sincere advisors? All of these things are possibility, but it takes a critical thinker to examine, why is the source of this idea trying to tell me that why are they trying to convince me that this is the truth? Why are they claiming or making this claim in order to sway me? Sometimes there are people who try to convince us of things that aren't necessarily true, but they have a profit motive. Like, they benefit if you believe what they believe and believe what they're telling you. Sometimes there are ideas that simply don't add up. And again, that's how critical thinking comes in. And the third is going to be the questioning. And questioning is asking the question, why? Why is this happening? Why would this claim be made? Why would the evidence be this way? And digging deep. There are times in which we may feel sad or distressed or stressed out, and simply taking a moment to step by and say, why am I feeling so stressed right now? What's going on in my life that's making me feel stressed? And if I think about it, I'd say, oh yeah, I was late to work and my boss got mad at me for whatever reason. It's like, okay, cool. I know what's going on. Is that the source of why I'm feeling this way? Why might my boss being upset at me affect me in this way? So it might be because, oh, well, I feel like my job is at risk. I feel like my security, my financial stability is at risk. It might be because I feel like my boss doesn't like me, and I have the feeling like I want to be approved of by other people. There are all sorts of reasons, but using these rational, logical tools and these tools of the mind in order to derive the truth of what's really going on in our minds, what's really going on in our emotions, what's really going on that's making us feel the way that we feel. The mind is a powerful tool that can help us to not only establish what we're feeling, but to question the truth and find the truth of what's really going on. And there is an idea, it's kind of esoteric, but I'll share it anyway. Just because there's chatter that goes on in the mind, just because your imagination or your mind is telling you something, doesn't necessarily mean it's true. You might be in a public place and you drop something, right? And all of a sudden, on the other side of the park or whatever, somebody starts bursting out laughing. You could imagine that person is laughing at you because you dropped your glass or you dropped whatever you dropped. Or it could be completely unrelated. Just because your mind tells you, oh, look at those people, they're laughing at you, that doesn't make it true. It's entirely possible that they're laughing for a completely different reason. And actually, there's another example about this in terms of people who speak another language. A lot of times, a lot of people feel insecure or uncomfortable when somebody else is speaking in another language in their presence. They might imagine, oh, that person's probably talking about me. Why do they think that? Because they don't understand what the person is saying and they're assuming the worst. But they're probably talking about their own affairs. They're probably talking about their own families and their own stuff going on. There needs to be more of a reason than just that to believe that they're talking about me. But the mind might suggest, oh, look at those people, they're laughing at me. But is it true? To find the truth in these situations helps to establish a sense of peace and calm, because there's a lot of frustration that comes in the world, not by the things that are happening in other people's lives, what in our lives, or what people are doing to us, but in the way that we are misunderstanding the truth of what's actually happened. But if we don't value the truth and we don't look for the truth, how will we ever find it? We have to be open to finding the truth in order to understand. And also, the benefit of finding the truth is that you end up with peace and solace and understanding in the end. So these are 3 tools of the mind, which are reason or aql, critical thinking, and questioning, asking why, and questioning, digging deep to make sure that we verify the truth of what's going on. And digging deep, I want to give another example of questioning. So I'm trying to think of a good example. I think a good example would be, I'll use that example. So there is an argument or a political ideology, right, that says that if the richest people in the country get a tax break, that's going to be good for the rest of the economy and everybody else is going to flourish. Now, we've got to question, why is somebody making that assertion? Clearly, they're saying that because they want to lower taxes for the rich, right? That's clear. But the question is that true? Evidence and history has shown on multiple occurrences when tax breaks have gone to the rich tend to save and invest, but not buy and not hire people. So we can look at this most recent example of the Trump tax cuts. Walmart laid off, 3,000, 30,000? I don't remember the number of people that they laid off. Sears also laid off people. All sorts of other businesses are laying off people because of the tax breaks, they were able to do that. If it's true that tax breaks increase jobs, you would expect that after a huge tax break, more jobs would be created. But that's not what's been happening. Another example of questioning, how could that be true? If that's true, isn't it the case that when poor people have money, they spend it? They invest it in the economy. They're buying the things that they need for their families, for their children, that they actually they're stimulating the economy. Because when poor people have money, they spend it because they already don't have that much. But when rich people have excess money, they don't spend it. That's not what they do with it. They typically will just save it or invest it and allow it to accrue more interest. So begging the question, this idea that tax breaks for the rich will trickle down to the bottom, how is that logical? Clearly not. And evidence points out it doesn't happen that way. The rising tide lifts all ships doesn't work, and it hasn't worked historically or now. So again, using this basic questioning to see, is this really true? Does it really make sense? Does it add up? Does the evidence support this? These are all examples and ways of using questioning, critical thinking, and Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, and using reason. And with that, I'll close, and I'll talk to you all again soon, inshallah. Have a good night. Good peace, and peace to you all. Salam.